On the morning of August 31st, 2004, Burger King employee in Richmond Hill, Georgia arrived for an early shift and found something behind the restaurant that stopped her cold. A man, naked, unconscious, face down on the ground beside the dumpster. Sunburned badly enough to suggest he had been there for hours, possibly through the night. No clothes, no wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. No shoes, nothing in the surrounding area that explained how he had arrived or where he had come from. No abandoned vehicle. No reports from nearby hotels or restaurants of anyone matching his description. No footprints that led back to anywhere useful. Just a man, on the ground, with nothing. Emergency services took him to St. Joseph's Candler Hospital in Savannah. The staff logged him in as Burger King Doe, BK Doe, a placeholder name for a placeholder person, someone who existed in the hospital's records as a body with a heartbeat and no history attached to it. For 2 weeks, he was semi-conscious and largely unreachable. And then gradually he came back. Not to himself. He did not come back to himself. He came back to a version of awareness in which he understood that he was a person, that he was in a hospital, that people were asking him questions, and that he did not know the answers to almost any of them. He remembered one thing about his name. He thought it was Benjamin. Spelled unusually, with an instead of an I, a detail he could not explain. For a surname he chose Kyle, because his hospital initials were BK and Burger King was where he had been found, and some part of him needed to anchor his new identity to the only fixed point available. He became Benjamin Kyle. He had cataracts in both eyes serious enough to suggest they had been developing for years without treatment. A charity eventually raised enough money to pay for surgery 9 months after he was found. He had fragments, blurred memories of Denver, Colorado, something that felt like Indianapolis, maybe from the 1950s or early 1960s. A sense that he might be in his mid-50s, which would put his birth somewhere around 1948 or 1949. He thought his birthday might be August 29th. He was not certain of anything. He did not know where he had been for the weeks or months or years before ending up behind that dumpster. He did not know how he had arrived in Georgia. He did not know what had happened to him the night before he was found or the night before that or any night stretching back through a past that his mind had sealed off as completely as if it had never existed. Doctors would eventually diagnose him with dissociative amnesia. Not the movie version, the clean slate where someone wakes up and simply has no memories and everyone accepts this at face value, and the story is sympathetic from start to finish. The real version, which is messier and more complicated, and which raises questions that are harder to answer than the ones in films. Because dissociative amnesia of the severity Benjamin Kyle appeared to have, covering decades of a person's life, triggered by some event dramatic enough to cause the mind to seal itself off completely from everything that preceded it, is extraordinarily rare. Documented cases exist, but they are few. The neurological and psychological literature on this condition is full of qualifications and disputes about its extent and its causes and whether, in certain cases, the amnesia is as complete as the person claiming it suggests. These questions would become important later. Very important. But in 2004, and for the years immediately following, the Benjamin Kyle story was not a story about questions. It was a story about a man without a past, and about the extraordinary human effort that strangers were willing to invest in helping him find one. He was released from the hospital and spent time in a men's shelter. He mowed lawns for cash. A nurse he met at a healthcare center in Savannah became a supporter and helped him financially while he tried to piece together fragments that refused to cohere. He had a specific memory of working somewhere institutional, possibly a university. He knew how to drive a car. He retained skills and knowledge that suggested a functional adult life before whatever had happened to him, including knowledge of geography and current events that was inconsistent with a man who had genuinely lost access to everything he had ever learned. In 2008, he appeared on the Dr. Phil show. The producers brought in a hypnotist in an attempt to access memories that conventional recall could not reach. Nothing definitive emerged. The episode aired. People watched. And the story of Benjamin Kyle, the man with no past, began to circulate through the internet in the specific way that mysteries circulate when they are both sympathetic and fundamentally unanswerable. He appeared on Reddit. He gave interviews. A documentary student from Florida State University began filming him in 2011, eventually producing a short film called Finding Benjamin that was screened at Tribeca and Cannes and generated additional public attention. A forensic genealogist named Cece Moore, who heads the genetic genealogy unit at Parabon Nanolabs, and who would later become one of the most significant figures in cold case DNA work in the United States, took on Benjamin Kyle's case. She and her team worked with DNA samples, building family trees through distant matches, following the genetic threads that even the most anonymous person leaves behind in the biological record of their relatives. The process was painstaking. It took years, and in late 2015, it produced a result. His name was William Burgess Powell. He had been born on August 29, 1948, in Lafayette, Indiana. The birthday he had vaguely thought he might have was exactly right. He had grown up in Indiana, left home eventually, and worked at Purdue University as a janitor. He had records of employment in various jobs through 1983. And then in 1976, nearly 30 years before he turned up behind that dumpster in Georgia, he had disappeared. In March 1976, William Powell's brother had filed a missing persons report. Powell had abandoned his possessions, including his car and the trailer he had been living on someone else's property. His car was found in a remote area of Battleground, Indiana, with its license plates removed. His family had eventually concluded, over the years that followed without any contact, that he was probably dead. He was not dead. He was somewhere. For 21 years between 1983, when his employment records stopped, and 2004, when he turned up in Georgia, William Powell existed off the grid. No Social Security records. No tax filings. No employment history that has been traced. No address. No contacts. No documented life of any kind. He was not in any missing persons database in a way that connected to his real identity. He was not in any criminal database. He was not anywhere that any system could find him. George Keck had been investigated by law enforcement in connection with multiple unsolved cases from Lafayette and the surrounding area in the 1970s. The most significant of these involved the 1977 murder of Christine Kozik, a student at Purdue University. Kozik had been killed in a case that was never solved. Keck had been a person of interest. He had never been charged. He died in 2020. The documentary team tracked down people who claimed to have information connecting William Powell to Keck and to the crime network the filmmakers believed Keck had been part of. They filmed a confrontation between Shannon Evangelista and Keck before his death, in which she asked him directly about his knowledge of Powell. They interviewed witnesses who described Powell in the context of that Lafayette network in ways that, if accurate, suggested his 1976 disappearance was not simply a man walking away from a difficult life, but something more deliberate, something more connected to what was happening around him at the time. The theory that the filmmakers put forward, carefully noted as unproven, and is not the basis for any charges against Powell, is this. Powell did not lose his memory as the result of some mysterious traumatic event that happened to him behind a Georgia Burger King. He came to Georgia deliberately. He had been living off the grid for 21 years not because he could not remember his life, but because he was hiding from it, or from the people in it, or from what he knew about it. And when he was found and hospitalized and unable simply to walk away, he adopted the amnesia narrative as the explanation for his presence and his lack of identity that would generate sympathy and assistance rather than scrutiny. Shannon Evangelista said she knows why he left and why he fled. She said she knows where he went for most of the missing years, but does not yet know who he was and what he was like during that time, and wants to know all of it. She said he has cut off communication with the documentary team. She said if we stop, he wins. She said we cannot give up. William Powell, now 77 years old, has not been charged with any crime. He has not been arrested. He has not been formally accused of any specific wrongdoing in connection with any of the cold cases the documentary references. The filmmakers are clear about this. Their documentary does not present evidence that would meet a legal standard for prosecution. It presents witness accounts and circumstantial connections and the questions that arise from them, and it leaves the viewer to assess those questions without claiming to have definitively answered them. What the available record establishes with certainty is this. A man who disappeared from Indiana in 1976 spent 21 years without a trace. He turned up in Georgia in 2004 with no identification and a claimed inability to remember his past. He was identified through DNA genealogy a decade later. The identification confirmed some of what he had said about himself and left a 21-year gap entirely unexplained. He has never provided an account of where he was or what he was doing during those years. He has cut off contact with the people who have been most actively investigating that gap. There are two ways to read all of this. The first is that William Powell is a man with a genuine and severe dissociative condition who walked away from a difficult life in 1976, spent decades in circumstances that left no official trace, and was found in the aftermath of whatever final crisis produced the scene behind that dumpster, and who has never been able to access the memories that would explain his missing years because those memories are genuinely inaccessible to him. The second is that William Powell is a man who knew exactly what he was doing in 1976 and exactly what he was doing for the 21 years that followed, who arrived in Georgia not as a victim of some unknown event but as a person who had been living a life he needed to step away from completely, who found in the amnesia narrative a framework that the people who encountered him were compassionate enough to accept and support, and that cost him far less in scrutiny than the truth would have. The documentary does not resolve this question. The investigators who looked at the case have not resolved this question. The genetic genealogists who identified him resolved the identity question but not the character question. And William Powell himself, who is the only person who knows the answer with certainty, is not talking. He is 77 years old and living a relatively private life. He has a brother who said they picked up right where they left off. He has the legal identification he did not have for over a decade. He has access to the government assistance that identification makes possible. He has, as far as the public record shows, no immediate legal jeopardy. And somewhere in the years between 1976 and 2004, in the places he moved through without leaving a trace in any official record, whatever happened is still there. Still undocumented. Still unexplained. Still connected, if the filmmakers are right, to people who died without being charged for what they did in cases that were never solved. The dumpster behind the Burger King in Richmond Hill, Georgia is still there. The restaurant is still open. The town has moved on in the way that towns move on. And the man who was found there naked in the August heat of 2004, who chose the name Benjaman Kyle based on the initials of a fast food chain, who spent 11 years as the only officially unidentified American citizen known by name to the public, is in Indiana somewhere, living a life that the documentary team cannot reach him to ask about. The investigation Discovery docuseries The Many Lives of Benjaman Kyle premiered in May 2026. It does not end with a resolution. It ends with Shannon Evangelista saying she knows too much to stop. It ends with the cold cases still open and the missing years still unaccounted for and a 77-year-old man who has stopped answering his phone. Whether the full truth about William Powell ever emerges through new witness testimony, through documentary evidence from the years he was off the grid, through a deathbed statement from the man himself, or not at all, is something that nobody can predict. What can be said is that the story that began with a Burger King employee finding a naked man behind a dumpster at 5 a.m. turned out to be something considerably more complicated than a medical mystery about a man without a past. The past was there all along. It just did not want to be found. Leave a comment below. Tell me which version of this story you believe. Tell me whether you think William Powell had genuine amnesia or whether you think he knew exactly who he was. Tell me what you think happened in those 21 missing years. This is a case where the question is still genuinely open, and I want to know what you think the answer is. Subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next. Because this story is not finished, and when it breaks, we will be here to tell it properly.